welcome all of the participants that are out there for our monthly Forage Dairyman webinar. We appreciate your participation, your interest. We're anxious to hear Mike Hutjens today, our presenter on new corn silage utilization for dairy rations, and there are some timely things that Mike is going to be talking about in terms of the weather and crop situation around the country. We also want to thank Biotol for their sponsorship today. And Mike, with that, we'll let you get started. We know you have a lot of ground to cover, so take it from here.
Well, very good, Steve. It's always a pleasure to come back and be on the Forage Dairyman webinar. And today our title is going to be twisted around a little bit. It says New Corn Silage Utilization for Dairy Rations. And some of you were listening earlier and discovered that this talk would have been, or webinar would have been slightly different had we did this in May or June as far as that goes. So today's program, we're going to be spending on these topics, hopefully time permitting. Drought concerns and strategies. Number 2, shredlage, snaplage, producing high quality corn silage, pricing corn silage, which will be a factor this year, and as always at the end of the webinar, welcome your questions and concerns. So let's get off and running at this point. Here is drought-stressed corn. Jim Baltz picked this picture up here in Illinois. You can see this corn has got a serious problem, and Illinois is right in the heartland of this. We just had a map up. Some of you saw it a bit earlier by Jim Baltz, showing very broad areas all the way from Idaho to Texas, all the way to the East Coast. It looks like New York, you're blessed in terms of not having been hit quite this badly. So let's get ready to vote here and say, okay, here's our first polling or survey question with drought, and the polls are open. Jim opened it with drought-stressed corn. I recommend, and pick what you think might be the most important thing to be doing out here. By the way, all these are good recommendations. I'm just kind of curious to find out, if you only get to do one, which one would you actually do? So now the polls are opening and we're off and running, and one person voted, so that's 100% at this stage of the game. And we're off and running at this point. So these are the kind of questions I think our producers are looking at, as well as our educators and our feed companies and our consultants and our veterinarians, saying, well, what are we going to do with the situation that's enveloping here in the Midwest as far as that goes? So we're moving right along at this stage again. We got about 45% of the vote in, and we're at 45. He's got to vote quickly here. Let's go at this one here. Jim, will I see that blown up a little bit bigger here in a few minutes, a few seconds, I should say? I tell you, let's go ahead and we've got about 2/3 of the vote in. Is that right, Jim? Looks all right. Let's go ahead and close the polls, and let's kind of see what everybody had here to say at this point. High chopping, leaving a third. A third of you voted for that one. Another third went with adding inoculant. Waiting. Another 2%, 10% adding grain to the corn silage, and delay chopping until the moisture is right. All are really good ideas. Let's go through some of these here in the next few minutes and see where we come up with. Thought I'd update you very quickly on your PowerPoint. This came in last week in Illinois, Southern Illinois. We had one of our consultants was in the field and ran 2 different samples. Critical for you to see here. One was a short corn at about 3.5, 4 feet. Notice the dry matter, very, very wet. There's your first take-home message. It may look dead out there or very dry, but these plants are still pretty succulent at this point. Number 2, this is the second highest test according to the Centralia Diagnostic Lab that they received. I just talked to them this morning. That one's dangerous. 17,000 parts per million. That's over the cut point, and you really got to be sure you dilute that down. Now, these numbers, be well aware, these are on 100. These are total ration dry matter. So again, by diluting this down with maybe some alfalfa haylage or some hay, some grains of that, you can live with this. Here's a tasseled corn with an ear in it. They say half the ears they're getting in have been pollinated. The other half are not pollinated, which means those are going to be barren stalks. And again, you can see fairly modestly high numbers at this point. So let's go to our next PowerPoint and simply say this is what happens to the nutrient content when we look at the feed here. This is some work from the University of Maryland. That's got done several years ago, but still applies. You can see your normal corn size in the top line up there. You can read those numbers rather than I can. again. Drought stress, you can see what's happening here. If we have a few ears in there, you're going to have some starch. So you can see the TDN value goes up a little bit higher here. No ears, you're going to have basically a high quality grass forage. So again, it will have some feed value, and we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. So certainly the protein content will be higher. That probably reflects some of the nitrates and protein value sitting in that stock, but you can see the fiber numbers are going up. And we in Illinois look at 28% ADF, and Maryland may like that for an average number. We'd be looking more at 24, 25, 23. So we'll be over 70% in our normal corn silages. So you might ask, what about this nitrate situation? This is the standard table. You'll see that coming across a number of your feed companies, consultants at this stage of the game. You can see that it's below 4,400 parts per million. For those of you that want to do percentages, put your decimal points into that's 0.44%, 0.44%. So if you want to try to remember the magic number, it should be below 0.5 or half of 1% nitrates. A lot of corn silage will be up in that 1,200 to 2,200 level of nitrates. So there's always nitrate in corn silage because it's a very active growing plant. You can then read the rest of the numbers and see the limitations or recommended actions out there. Simply means to reduce, you have to start diluting it down with other feedstuffs in the ration to get that number. Over 1760 you would not feed if that was your sole source of feed going into a dairy cow or a beef cow or growing heifers as far as that goes. Of the 70 samples that came into the Centralia lab as of this morning, 15% of them were safe, below the 0.44 or 4,400 parts per million. They had another third of them between the next category. Then the next category, they had another 30%. And finally, they had about 10% over 1.5, and 2 of them were very considered toxic. They had 1 sample over 2%, which would be 20,000 parts per million. The chemist there did know what that was. That was a plant tissue sample taken last week after a rain. And so there's another take-home message. If we do get some rain, and we did get an inch of rain just 10 miles west of Champaign here, that corn plant will really suck up nitrates now. So it'll be sky high at that name of the game. On the bottom, notice values nitrate and nitrogen. Some labs report that. That simply means these are nitrates. So don't get confused out there, consultants. This is nitrate values. If you go to nitrate and nitrogen, you divide by 4.4. So if your test comes back from your lab that way, then 1,000 parts per million would be action level, concern levels for nitrate and nitrogen, just the way it's calculated and expressed. Another question came up in High Chop, and a third of you voted for this. Obviously, you're not a tight Dutchman like Hutjens here. This is some work that came out of Wisconsin looking at the whole plant at about 1,000 parts per million, but you'll notice the bottom third of the stalk is hotter. No question, that's where nitrates accumulate in the plant. So some of you that voted for chopping high, the good news is you would say, well, I can really leave a large amount of that in the field. That is the good news. The bad news is you're also going to leave tonnage out there. And my dairymen are running scared of whether we're going to feed cows here in Illinois this year. Unfortunately, we're going to repeat a little bit what happened in Oklahoma and Texas last year at this point. Bottom line, guys, I'm telling our dairymen not to chop it high. I'm going to take it all. I'm going to put it through a fermentation cycle, and you'll see why here in just a few minutes. But certainly, that is a sound recommendation if you've got all kinds of feed and you don't want to take any risks out there in the feeding program. So what are some of the strategies with this drought-stressed corn at this point? Certainly, we're looking at harvesting systems. I would not pasture it. Cows and cattle have a unique way of grabbing things they shouldn't be eating. So I would not pasture or green chop. I think you lose control of the crop as far as that goes. Ensiling is the way to go to ensile this product, but be well aware these plants are awfully soaking wet. And you're going to be chopping at 25, 26% moisture, dry matter rather. You're going to have water coming out of your ears, and EPA will not be your friend, at least not here in Illinois at this stage. So you're going to have to wait till this plant gets down, and most people are suggesting taking 5 or 6 stalks, putting through a limb chopper or shredder or some sort, and then get a sample run through a commercial lab or do a dry matter using a Koster tester or a microwave oven as far as that goes. You can bale this stuff, and Steve indicated he saw a release, and there is some baling going on in Illinois. Basically, you will bale that just like you would any other forage grass, because that's basically what you have at that point. You can also make baleage out of it. And again, if you go baleage, the advantage is you're going to dissipate some of those nitrates. You will not do that with baling hay. It's got to go through a fermentation, and of course that also brings up the red flags of nitrogen gases in silos, which is another going to be a potential problem we got to be well aware of when we start ensiling here our corn silages. So let's wrap up this part of the presentation, talk about ensiling guidelines. We'll go through these rather fast, but we certainly will welcome your questions at the end of the seminar at this point. There's your first big bullet point. I went back, found some Purdue data showing that fermentation of the corn silage will reduce the nitrate content by 36 to 41%. I've also seen some news releases saying as high as 60%. This one is a research study, so certainly we can cut it at least in a third, if not half, by going through a good fermentation. High chop, we already covered that. This is one thumb rule. Be careful with it, though, about for each linear foot of material you leave in the field or you have in the field, you might estimate about 1 ton of dry matter per linear foot. I think that the picture Jim showed us earlier with that drought-stressed corn, I'd be a little nervous about a ton of dry matter per linear foot on that plant. But we have corn now that's tasseling at 6 and 7 feet. There's a massive amount of dry matter there right now. We're just wondering if it's going to pollinate and get corn in it. So high chop is an alternative. I would not recommend doing it if I'm going to make silage out of it. I do highly recommend a bacteria inoculant. We do that for all corn silages and products like that, but certainly this year, because the natural bacteria in the field, those little buggers are going to have a problem with 100 degrees as well. So we certainly want to add a desired bacteria specifically for corn silage that will improve the fermentation potential of that crop. I would not add urea or NPN sources to the drought-stressed corn silage. You have nitrates coming out of your ears already. That's a source of NPN. The good news is that a small amount of nitrates the cow can convert and use as a source of bacterial nitrogen to produce bacterial protein. The question is, it doesn't cause a problem with her absorbing that as ammonia and getting it into the bloodstream as an NPN source from that aspect. I would not put that in. I would not also put any limestone in, because both those are going to extend or slow down the fermentation. They are basic one, and the quicker I can get to a pH 4, the better off we're going to be. I would not add corn to it. I would not chase after this. This drought-stressed corn could be a challenge to ferment by adding corn, barley, wheat, corn, gluten feed, some of these products. I always get nervous. I'm chasing marginal feed that I'm not sure I can control easily with good feed. I'd rather take that feed and add that to the drought-stressed corn silage after fermentation, when I can access such things as nitrates and other aspects of the corn. We mentioned earlier, I want to make sure all our listeners see that there's going to be some real risks with silo gas, so be really, really careful. We think if you're going in these silos especially, you got to have oxygen. You just can't run blowers. Scares me. I think you need an oxygen source to go into those silos if you've got to go in there in the first 2 or 3 weeks after ensiling. We then recommend to test for nitrates after the ensiling process, and then you and your nutritionist, your veterinarian, your consultant can deal with that in terms of getting nitrates levels down to a manageable level. So that's a very busy slide, Steve, with lots of facts and figures on it, but certainly strategies that we take a look at with this crop that we have. So that completes that first phase of our webinar today, talking about drought-stressed corn silage. Some of you that are blessed in New York and maybe in Canada, you don't have to worry about that because you've gotten rains here, or you're in another foreign country that have moisture, but we thought it was just critical that we try to get some information out to our producers here that are going to be faced with decisions here in the next 2 to 4 or 6 weeks. The bottom line is, don't chop it too early. As long as I've got green material and I get some timely rains, that crop is going to put down more dry matter. And I guess that's another take-home message, Jim, we really want to stress is don't get going too quickly. For example, we had some people chopping near Paxton, and they caught that inch of rain. Well, that corn is going to come back. They may not get a lot of corn grain out of it, but certainly an alternative. What is that going to be worth? Our estimation, Steve, is that those corn stalks, you look at the N, P, and K, especially phosphorus and potassium in there, probably in that $30 to $35 a ton range. That would be like a dry corn stalks, barren corn stalks. It's probably going to cost you producers another $30 to bring them in, according to Dave Fisher. So we're probably going to be looking at buying it from the field in that $30 or $40 range. And I tell you, folks, box. If you're living in areas where drought is severe, that's one alternative, assuming you can take that depending on what the insurance claims and adjustments are going to be. The good news in Illinois, according to our Ag Econ people, about 60% of our farmers have insurance on their corn crop, and that's going to be awfully critical at this stage of the game. So, Steve, we're going to motor on. Time's getting away on us here, I noticed from my clock. Let's look at another new technology that many of us heard about, and that's called Shredlage. Shredlage. And you can see this is a picture that shows the actual product, what it looks like. It looks much different in some respects to what kernel processed corn silage looks like, and certainly a lot different than what chopped corn silage is going to look like. So let's spend a little bit of time on Shredlage, another aspect of new corn silage technologies coming with it. It is basically a different type of a process out there. Last year, there were 9 of these units available in the U.S. On CLOS. The word is there are going to be more of these units available this year going in the field, and John Deere is looking at it very, very seriously at this point, according to Roger Olson, who helped design and develop this technology. It's a longitudinal ripping of the forage, so we're really increasing surface area. All of us know in nutrition, the more surface area I have, the more the bacteria can attach and attack those fiber particles, and also it means the small intestine, especially in the case of starches, have a better job of digesting it as well. Because of this ripping effect, we're going to a much longer particle size. We're going to 1 1/4 inch theoretical length of chop. This is for you metric people, 30 millimeters. Our current kernel processing guidelines are 3/4 of an inch at about 18 millimeters. So you can see we're getting it quite a bit longer. The excitement of that is that we start getting pieces of silage that look like straw, alfalfa stems, and grass. So we're getting some more of that top box Penn State material. The rind, which is kind of the pith of the plant, is opened up at this point. And again, we continue to have the ability to smash corn kernels, and the sides actually looks a bit fluffier and softer, although it still packs well if you've got the moisture content there. Thanks to Wisconsin, the next several PowerPoints from Randy Shaver and Dr. Schinner and other people at Wisconsin, this shows you a little different form. And talking with Roger Olson, they have updated their rollers a little bit. These rollers have a total different configuration, as you can see on the surface there, compared to what you see on the right over here. The one over here on the right, you can see are your classic kernel processors. Over here on the left, you can see the different structure here. They also change the speeds of these rollers so you can really get some ripping effects going out here in the feeding program. Here's a picture. Randy Shaver has got, to my knowledge, is the only controlled research study on it. On the left here is your Shredlage. You can see much longer particles of feed in this sample here coming out of the field. On the right, you can see what he calls KP. Those of you who were in the Army get nervous when we see KP because that was always an ugly scene. Stands for kernel process, and it'll be referred to in the next several PowerPoints. Our thanks to Randy for that. The next PowerPoint shows the actual corn itself. You can see the Shredlage on the left is processed. It's actually processed finer than what's over here on the right at this stage. So this is a picture of the 2 different feeds that you're going to see the research results here in just a few minutes. We would like to see these feeds. Notice here's a corn kernel. Here's another pretty big piece of corn. We like to decimate the starch. So Shredlage or kernel process, we want this stuff hammered because we just don't want to see it a second time, especially if the corn size starts getting drier. And with our drought stress concerns, that's going to be a challenge to try to pick the right moisture level. So both of these I'd like to see a bit finer if I could, in my point. And talking with Roger Olson, he said some of these processes were getting beat up pretty badly when they did some of these test choppings last fall out there at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Here is the results from Randy Shaver at the bottom. You can see here is your Shredlage and here's your KP, and you can see what's happening is we're literally taking and moving some of the second box into the top box. So you can see about 1/3 of it is on the top box. Most kernel processes somewhere around 6, 8, or 10%. More about that in just a few minutes. So we're getting more longer fibers in there. That's going to be a plus if you want to make sure you have enough here on the top box. You can see quite a bit of difference here. And this is the actual corn size that Randy shook out. Not much difference in the lower boxes at this stage of the game. They did a very interesting study. It was a short-term study, and here's your shredlage, and here's kernel process starting, I believe, at about 114 days after milk, after calving. So as a result, these cows were off their peaks. Pretty good production that you can see, but you see certainly a very close, almost statistical difference depending what level of probability you want to pick. But you can see here about a liter more milk, or about 2.3 pounds more milk here on these cows here. Fat corrected milk, you can see about the same thing. Energy corrected milk, about, again, 2 pounds or a kilo there. And you can see a very good feed efficiency. These cows are doing extremely well. Around 1.76 is what we like to see as well. So we got more milk. The shredlage produced more milk out here in the program. What's interesting, you can see we started this study here over here, and here's the kernel process cows. Actually, they were starting out a little bit higher. I don't believe that is statistically significant, but you can see the shredlage cows by week 4 were actually producing more milk. They were more persistent, and you can see as we go out here to week 6 and week 8, highly significant at this stage of the game. If you look at milk production, here sits your 100 pounds, here sits about 95.5 pounds. So you can see these are really spreading here. So the shredlage cows are more persistent, holding up higher levels of milk production. And this is a pretty normal decline. So I wouldn't be worried about the blue line. Simply, these cows are very, very persistent, and you can see the statistical package on this one as well. Randy's also done some preliminary work, and they may have better information. I heard this at a presentation that Randy presented here about a couple of months ago. Here you can see the shredlage. This is the in situ, which means starch digestibility in the cow, in the cow with the in situ procedure. You can see the shredlage starch is more digestible, much higher, starting at about 80%, where the kernel process is lower. You can see then both of these start increasing as we get over from the 12-hour to the 24-hour. But this is huge, folks. This is huge, and that is statistic. Phew, wow, statistically significant. I'll get it right yet, Steve, out here as well. So you can see certainly change the starch dynamics. As we mentioned earlier, I'd like to see this probably hit a little bit harder in both of them at this stage of the game. We then look at NDF digestibility, and this was a little disappointing to me. I was hoping to see more in this 24-hour incubation. I would like to maybe 30 would make a difference. I expected the shredlage to be higher. Obviously, there is no treatment effect here at this point. I thought the shredding of the plant, ripping it apart, would make that silage a bit more digestible. I'll bet you a piece of pie, Jim and Steve, that in the future we're going to see this number get better, because that's one of the technologies, is to make that stock even more digestible. So we're trying to get more digestibility of the stock, certainly good utilization of the starch, and certainly getting a little more length to the corn silage so that we don't have to buy some of those straws and hays that we see in some of our rations here in the Midwest. So certainly it's an exciting technology. I thought, though, I'd share one other one with you. This is last year we had a meeting in central Illinois in which we had some 60 samples of silages and TMRs came in, and this was the winner. And let me just show you. Now, this is conventional processed 3/4 of an inch corn silage. Notice the shakeout on this one. The top box at 13%. You'll see them up closer in just a minute. Almost 70% in the middle box. I love that. And basically 18% on the bottom. We argue the top 2 boxes are effective fiber. So you can see this corn silage sample would certainly rival the shredlage, except shredlage would have a higher percent up here. And there's some interesting discussions we can argue about the dynamics of where those numbers should be. Here's a close-up of it. I think, Steve, it doesn't get much better than this. Shredlage will be a little bit longer, but you can see the very precise chop on this herd. The herd runs about a 25,000-pound Holstein herd average. I know the herd. We've been on the farm with our Dairy Challenge kids. You can see a very precise, nice job of chopping. Here's your middle box. Look at the massive amount of material. I can only see one little piece of corn sitting over here, which is good news. Simply, we've decimated the corn there. This was a 33% starch sample, by the way, and now you can see in the bottom box, you can see more evidence of corn and fine particles down here. So certainly processing corn silage is here. I think there's no question, and the shredlage is going to open up another avenue for some of us who are going to feed higher corn silage-based diets that may want to have a little different particle size than we see in more of the traditional corn silages. If you're not kernel processing, you're going to be chopping at 3/8 to 1/4 of an inch. Means there's going to be nothing on the top box and probably 50% on the bottom box. I quickly argue then that corn silage becomes more of a concentrate in terms of physical dynamics in the feeding program than it would be a forage out there in the program. Here sits our guidelines. We will not take time to go through it, but if I was with the traditional process 3/4 inch theoretical length of chop, these are the kind of numbers I get to see over here. And notice that one we just saw, this number was close to 70%. Really amazing stuff, amazing stuff. The new Shredlage, you'll be sitting over here around a 30% and around a 40% number over here. So certain differences in starch dynamics and starch characteristics. Well, that takes care of part 2 of our presentation. We're going to move on here. Get ready. We're going to be voting here in just a few minutes. So get ready, you Democrats, Republicans, to vote here. We thought we'd do what we call the top 8. Top 8 guidelines in terms of corn silage strategies. And sure enough, here comes our next poll. So Jim has opened the poll, and the survey question says, which management factor is most important? So I'm playing hardball with you guys and gals here today. Basically, these are all pretty good practices. I'm kind of curious to find out which one you think is most important. By the way, as you are voting here on that last survey, I would have been in big trouble. I would have, my important point on there is don't chop the corn silage too fast, and don't chop it tall. So if you were wondering where did this independent Hutjens vote on that previous polling one, that was the 2 winners I would have voted for, and I probably would have voted for waiting till the plant was physically dead at this stage of the game. How are we doing? We got some votes coming in. We're slow here today. We're getting a 50% at 50%.
Mike, with the corn silages, the moisture levels, and all the other guidelines are about pretty much the same for Shredlage versus the conventional process.
Yeah, I think so. I wish Randy was on the line, but I think you're going to see very similar. I wouldn't go any drier because as the comment being fluffier, we all know we've got to get those bunkers, those bags, those silos packed. So I would say the moisture numbers would stay very similar in terms of stage and maturity for packing the product. Also, it's going to be a little bit longer. And we are well aware, got your ears on, folks out there, if all this drought-stressed corn gets short, chopper short, man, chopper short, chopper short. Jim, did you close the polls? He closed the polls. Right. And what do we have? Where we got delay harvesting. A third of you say let's delay until we get into this moisture level of 30, dry matter 35, 38. 11% say add inoculant. 11% said barrier. A third of you say packing it, and 10% delayed feeding. So obviously the winners is don't chop too early and pack the daylights out of it. So no, Steve, do you have a favorite one up there? He may be muted. I don't know if he voted or not. I'm going to put him on the spot here. We'll ask him.
Yeah, I got muted again. But when I saw the pack there, I think about some of those that have the uprights and the bags and what where their priorities would have been. But no, I really don't have a favorite, Mike.
Well, he must be one of those Republicans, can't make up his mind over there. Anyway, great. Interesting to see. We're going to move on, and here we go. So you're going to see numbers pop up. This is what we call the speed round. So hang on to your hats. Away we go. Number 1, by the way, this would have been my number 1. I know we got drought and we have those problems, but I think it's a big take-home message. This is some work that was done by Pioneer at Illinois State University, and not the big U of I here at Champaign. And what they simply said, looking at 28% plant dry matter all the way up to about 38. And look what happens, guys and gals, in normal corn silage. The starch content went up 76%. You know, some of us are saying we're going to see some expensive corn here, and I'm not going to give it away where I'm going to go with it. That's another question coming up here. But notice, as this plant matures, we just grab a whole bunch more starch. And with corn prices gone up 40 cents, Steve, I heard today corn went up 40 cents a bushel, and that was at 9 o'clock this morning once the markets opened up here. So we get a lot more starch, and of course that reduces our fiber content. So I think this is a take-home message. Those of you that have normal corn silage, if you can wait coming from 30 to 32 and get up to 36, it can make a huge difference in starch content. We work with a herd in Mexico, and I tell you the difference down in Mexico, down here, this will be somewhere around 21% starch. This over here will be somewhere around 34% 5% starch. You know what, Steve? Our cows figure that out really fast. The difference there is about 5 pounds of milk if we don't make an adjustment out there in the feeding program.
Got to have that starch.
Got to have the starch, and I'd rather than buying it, I just like to grow it out there on the farm. The inoculant, there's no question, we've got to be there. This is some neat data that was put together by Joe Harrison from the Journal of Dairy Science, looking at adding inoculants to corn silage. Here's your control listed on the left, and your inoculated products, and we have no idea whose inoculant was wet or dry, what kind of bugs, bacteria were in there, just in the Journal of Dairy Science. And here are the two big ones, folks, right there. Dry matter recovery, statistically significant, about 3% more dry matter recovery. Trust me, if we're going to be short on forage this year, that's like getting another 3 acres for every 100 that you're chopping out there. Huge. And then digestibility, dry matter digestibility, digestible energy, TDN for us Wisconsin farm boys. You can see another 2+ units, higher digestibility because we don't burn up some of those soluble starches and sugars out there in the fermentation process. That's huge. That is huge. And of course, you can see a trend on milk production. This is not significant, but again, you can see more milk coming as well. So I think when we look at inoculant, this is the normal fermentation profile appeared in one of the journal articles. This is one with an inoculant attitude at this stage of the game. And of course, you can see what's happening very quickly. We're getting that pH down below 4 or 5 because that's where the lactic acid really kicks in. So up in this area up here, we're actually burning, oxidizing plant nutrients. There's that dry matter loss occurring over here. I put the inoculant in and I get this pH drop, I get to a stable pH, and I get there much quicker. So I save a number of days where I'm saving nutrients instead of oxidizing them, waiting for the lactic acid bacteria to kick in at this stage of the game. This slide's a very busy one, Steve. It simply shows our guidelines on silage bacteria inoculants. You can see how they function. The levels are listed there. If you're going to be going with the Lactobacillus buchneri, several companies now have them in the market, they will go a little bit higher concentrations of those bacteria at this stage of the game. The cost, you can see, varies quite a bit. There are also some new inoculants on there that will actually break down NDF fiber that look very encouraging. Benefit to cost ratio 6-to-1 from Kansas State, and we recommend inoculating all our corn silages. That's a kind of a must at this stage of the game. This simply shows what happens when you inoculate your corn silage. This is the fermentation profile that comes from Lehman Kong and Randy Shaver, simply showing that's what we want that feed to look like. So when we open up our bunkers, bags, or silos, we're hoping to see these levels of dry matters, and actually you could cheat this up to 38 if you wish, but you can see the high levels of lactic acid, desirable pHs over here, and this ratio that looks very, very favorable. So certainly I think, as point 2 says, guys and gals, that's pretty much a no-brainer, slam dunk. Now, here's another survey question coming up. What do you think, and we just opened up the poll, what do you think the price of corn silage is going to be this year in your area? $40 a ton, $50 a ton, $60 a ton, $70 a ton, $80 a ton for normal, high-starch corn silage, assuming you will have it in your area. So the polls are open, and we're off and running at this stage of the game. And I tell you, pretty interesting what's happening here on the polls here, guys. I tell you, Barack Obama would be pleased to be seeing these polls if he was
voting fast this time.
Man, I tell you, it's come in pretty quickly at this stage of the game. We've got 72% of the vote in. People didn't hesitate at all, Steve.
Steve, did you pick multiplier you want to use there, Mike? Which it'll be interesting to see which multiplier you use this time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's close it. Let's close it and bring it up, and so I can read it here. Can they see this now? Oh, they can see it as well. Yeah. Well, you can see that you guys think $60 to $70 a ton corn silage is going to be pretty common here in your area. And I realize we have people from all over the world actually voting on this one as well. I'll answer this one for you a bit later as far as that goes. Let's move on, because later is here. Dave Fisher put this together for me. Dave is one of our retired extension educators and does a lot of work in agronomics. And what he did is he backed into this here, and he said, if I got 180 bushel corn, I wish we'd have that here in Illinois. If the price is $6.10, then you can work this out backwards. You can see this is the value of that corn standing out there. He then adds in the P and K. So remember, that's a number we talked about earlier, 36 $6 a ton if I remove that as silage. Of course, if I'm shelling that, then that fertility stays there. So he has a value sitting here of $1,100. He then divides that by 25 tons to the acre. That's at ratio of 7 bushel per ton of corn silage. That fits pretty much in the St. Louis market in a normal year. In central and northern Illinois, that would be 8. That number would be 8 bushel per acre. Some areas in northern New York State, northern Wisconsin, that could be a 6. So that simply reflects the variety that we're planting. And you can see that's $44 a ton standing in the field at this point. He then adds in some other numbers. I'm going to go to the next PowerPoint, Steve, and simply show you this PowerPoint, again, breaking it out a little differently to look at pricing, because some of you will want to write this down, because this will apply also if you're going to be chopping some of these drought-stressed corn, barren stalks, short corn, little starch corn, whatever we're going to call it. Here you can see on our slide here, we're going to use 7 again, much like Dave did, and here's your $6 a bushel corn. We're going to add harvesting costs, and that cost will go up with drought-stressed corn because you aren't going to have the tonnage. It's going to take more time to capture that crop. The inoculant we covered earlier, listing here in this range of $1 to $3. Shrink 5 or 10%. So that means shrink that's coming in the upright silo, probably on the lower end over here, and some of our piles and bunkers that could be on the higher end over here. Brian Holmes would say that Hutjens, I'm pretty conservative, that number could even be higher. So I back into this whole calculation here, and this comes up at $52 a ton for corn silage. If I go to $7 a bushel corn, and it's over that right now, according to the markets this morning, I'm going to add another $7, and there gets your $60 right there. And for some of you that voted for $70 a ton, we are thinking $8 a bushel corn may be possible. What's interesting, Steve, is we got a release over the weekend that some of the ethanol plants are shutting down at $8 or $7 a corn. They just cannot make any money making ethanol with the price of oil at $82 a barrel at this stage of the game. So, Steve, there's another wild card coming into play, and that is what's going to happen to the ethanol corn utilization demand out there as well.
It should loosen up some supply out there a little bit.
That could loosen up some supply. So this price simply says if this in this slide is $6, if that's $7, if it's $8, you can see that gets us very close to what many of you picked was the $70 a bushel corn as far as that goes at this stage of the game. So again, a useful PowerPoint as we see this corn market just going wildly, and also this drought occurring, and you're going to be looking at harvest costs probably going to be more in the $8 range than the $4 range out there as well. So pretty powerful PowerPoint trying to say where does this all fit in. Well, number 4 is one that says those of us who are fortunate to get corn silage that has starch in it or corn grain in it, we know that it increases with age. And while the first one's a bit controversial, the NDF digestibility, the change is modest. So there's been a couple studies showing response there. Here's the big 100-pound gorilla. Corn silage is stored longer and the more starch becomes available in the rumen. We call that aging of the corn or steeping of the corn, whatever you want to call it. And anywhere from 3 to 6 months after ensiling, you probably see the real benefits there. So again, if we have the inventory on farms, which may be a little more difficult with the year we're coming into here, allowing this corn to ferment longer in the bag, pile, bunker, silo would be a plus out there in the feeding program. Number 5, a lot of you picked on this one. It's an excellent one. And these are the guidelines. These are University of Wisconsin guidelines on it. You can see what we're looking at. We were on a farm here just a couple of days ago in which the density was on corn silage was nearly 20 pounds per cubic foot dry matter. They packed the daylights. There was no way you and I were going to take a sample out of that bunker because they had really, really hit it. So again, you can see the nicer formula. I believe this is Brian Holmes' formula coming here. Simply looking at the weight of your tractor, and that dictates how fast you can bring that feed in. So it says if this is your tractor here running, you can bring in about 38 tons per hour. That means that big Kloss, that big Deere, that big New Holland will bury this tractor in corn silage. You will have to have more than one tractor up there to get the job done. Number 6, a basic take-home point is covering the bunkers and piles. Not a lot of new stuff here except for the green, and we want to mention that as point number 7 in just a minute. Basically, this is how we are encouraging our dairymen to handle their bunkers. And that is to take this plastic, put it down, and then throw this over the wall, then put the feed in, and then bring these layers over the top like that, and then put the green layer in, which is your oxygen barrier. So certainly there is no question that having these multiple barriers are really going to be a plus. A few people will take and actually put a PCV pipe down here, or corrugated with holes in, so that if there's any rain, God help us if we get some rain here, hopefully in the winter, and some snow, that moisture can actually go down and get exported out of the bunker or away from the pile, so it doesn't damage the feed on the outside linings of these bunkers. Let's say a quick word about the green one area here. I realize this is a little bit of a promo, but there are some product in the market called oxygen barrier film, OBF, oxygen barrier film, and that's a specially developed plastic. It's a 3-layer plastic that reduces the oxygen penetration, and of course oxygen, when it penetrates, actually causes dry matter losses because of the fermentation, and reduces visible loss, especially on the top of the bunkers at this point, and will maintain forage quality. The economics looks pretty good at this stage of the game. Here's some data from Michigan State looking at this oxygen barrier information. A conventional 5 millimeter, the oxygen transmission rate. And Steve, I didn't understand how they measured this. They had a whole bunch of acronyms here, but simply saying we know a big number is bad. But they're measuring the oxygen actually penetration here. This is what we call 2-step versus 1-step. More about that a bit in another PowerPoint. A 2-step means I've got a thin layer like that green layer, and then you put your other plastic over the top. The 1-step means that you are actually have a barrier. The barrier is actually attached to the plastic on the underside. You can see both of them are very, very effective on oxygen transmission. No statistical difference here, as I recall looking at the data. There is some data on this, and this gets me excited. Dry matter losses, single layer 14%, double layer 12%, oxygen barrier 7%. Look at the layer of mold, significant difference in mold on the top of this. Inedible dry matter, you can see again, a single layer at a quite high level. In this research study here, you can see an impact on pH and, of course, an improvement in the fermentation profile with a very high level of lactic acid. So certainly, I think the economics are here looking at this product. The benefit to cost ratio is 6 to 1 when you look at the retained dry matter loss and the reduction in damaged feed. We already covered this the 2 different steps. The people tell me that the plastic going down with the 2-step one works very easily, that the product can be walked on at this stage of the game and have no problems with it. So again, something to be thinking about this year. If feed's going to be tight, silage is going to be worth $70 a ton. Wow, the economics of this look to me pretty powerful. Steve, another area is the Forage Rake. We've seen this on several farms. I don't know if you're using them at Hoards, but this looks like the real cat's meow. In fact, we've got some dairymen actually building them for smaller dairies at this stage of the game. You can see we rake this silage off very nicely. The feed comes down here. And then the beauty, of course, is to go in and mix this. If you can, just rake it around a little bit, because we know the quality of feed up here will be different than the quality of feed down here. So it gives a more uniform mixing of the feed that's going into our TMRs. So certainly we think that the raking or these spacers have real applications. Rake is a fairly simple one that doesn't have many moving parts compared to some of the other facers we see on the marketplace. Steve, I wanted to cover this one. This one was also added in the last 2 weeks when we start prepping for the webinar, and that's chemically treated corn stover. And the reason I bring that up is because it may have some applications in some of our drought-stressed areas, or areas where there will be corn stover, corn stalks, whatever we have here. The data comes from 2 beef operations, or 2 universities with beef. This comes from the 2012 Nebraska Beef Cattle Report, the Nebraska researchers here. And what we're doing here, we're adding 5% calcium oxide. This is also known as quicklime. We did some work here in Illinois, talking with the researcher. This is not too difficult to work with compared to like calcium hydroxide, sodium hydroxide, which can be pretty nasty chemicals out there. This is added into corn stover that was brought up to 50% dry matter. It was then allowed 30 days to work. In other words, to actually break down the fiber at this going. The price of this, you can see, as of last year, was $230 a ton for the quicklime, when limestone was $100 a ton. Of course, we're also buying some calcium here, which is going to be a plus as well. The treated stover was about $80 a ton, and that's when we priced the corn stover at $64 a ton. And that's the number you and I kicked around. Remember, $35, $40 in the field, and then another $25, $30 to pick it up, to either bale it, to chop it, to ensile it, to whatever you're going to do with it, get it out there in the feeding program. They saw a 12.5% improvement compared to untreated corn stover in their study there. The quality of the cattle were similar. I realize this is a dairy webinar, but that's what they're measuring here. And look at this one, Steve, pretty interesting. The profit was about $36 more when corn was at $6 a bushel. And we know right now, Jim just put on the screen, $7.25 is the price of corn September on the September market. The July market is $7.71 a bushel. So something to take a look at here.
It looks pretty good.
Here's another study that came from Iowa State. They did their research study. They had some data. You can see the same type of treatment. They brought in 20% into the ration. For our dry cows and growing heifers, we might be looking in this range as well. Actually, these were steer diets, and you can see a nice improvement here in dry matter digestibility. Trends and fiber digestibility were there as well. So certainly it might be another new idea, Steve, to think about when we look at going forward here in the program. The last thing we're going to race through very quickly, and Steve, we may come back and talk about starch dynamics a little bit later on in one of our webinars later on this fall. Let's say a word about snaplage, because we are not going to come back to the feed area until September, and by that time this will be all over. A quick word about snaplage. Again, Randy Shaver provided this information to me. My thanks to Randy Shaver. The excitement on snaplage is these great big processors. We can actually harvest the crop, process it, get it ready, put it in the bag, in the bunker, in the silo, ready to feed at this point. So for our audience, say, what in the world is snaplage? Some of you call it earlage. I like to call it snaplage because we are snapping the ear. So that includes the ear of the corn, the husk, and maybe some other plant parts, some leaf, maybe some tassel areas, top stalk will come into play at this stage of the game. We call it snaplage. Earlage, I envision that as just being the ear and the husk. So to me, earlage is this. Snaplage will pick up some of this other material as well. Material will be higher in NDF compared to corn. High moisture corn will be somewhere around 8 or 9% NDF. This is 25%. Therefore, we will have a lower level of starch. So there's no free lunch. But this is what excites our people. We can go in and take that crop right after chopping corn silage in a normal year, and we'll get another 25% dry matter per acre value. And that will have the value of 80 or 90% the value of shell corn at this point. So I end up getting more yield of a fairly good product out here. It has to be harvested wetter. We want it up around 40 to 45% moisture, so it really ferments. And I think you got to put the Buchneri inoculant on it. This is a fairly specific inoculant. I understand that, but the research out of Europe, out of Wisconsin, and other areas say this stuff really works. Florida works very, very well. We're going to cut this a black layer. So I'm going to go in faster, earlier, wetter, take a more dry matter per acre, and have more tonnage coming off the plant as far as that goes. This is a busy slide as we start wrapping up our webinar here this afternoon, at least an afternoon here in Illinois. You can see that here is shell corn, earlage or ear, and this would be snaplage. So you can see, again, it looks like we dropped a 0 off of here, but actually it should be 45, should be up around 45 here. But you can see there is no free lunch, there is less starch here. So again, you nutritionists, you're going to balance these rations on starch starch, sugar, and rumen fermentable carbohydrates at this point. And again, this snaplage can vary depending on the type of variety, the moisture content, the time of day. Some of these snapper heads you're going to get earlage. In other words, it'll be right over here because you don't get much of the plant part, because depending on how that unit is snapping on that given day out there. Randy Shaver did a quick study. We'll run through it quickly. Our time is gone. Here you can see this is high moisture shell corn, snaplage product over here, and he came in with a combination of snaplage and dry corn. I think it's a third dry corn, but don't hold me to that. You can go to his website and you'll find it. And you can see in terms of milk production, all three of these did a very nice job in terms of milk production. Dry matter intake, these cows ate a little bit less of this, I'm sure because of the higher fiber content over here. And now you can see the milk production, the feed efficiency numbers track pretty much with that same milk and similar dry matter intakes. This is the smoking gun here. You can see the snaplage in this study here being wetter. We think the starch dynamics is quicker. And you can see the butterfat test went down, and that was statistically significant. And they brought that back with some dry corn at this stage of the game, at this point. So it looks like with these MUN numbers being modestly high, significantly different here, we may have some rumen negative factors with this snaplage and this feeding program. So as nutritionists, you have to be aware of the moisture content and the rate of breakdown. Again, you can see here are the three studies. This is the high moisture corn in Illini orange. Here is the Illini blue snaplage down here, and you can see these cows about in the 6th week really got hit pretty hard. Here, this is the combination of the snaplage and the dry corn kept the butterfat test up. So starch dynamics are going to be important, and maybe a topic we discuss later on this fall, because there's new tests coming out here to get that job done. So certainly with management considerations with the snaplage here, you can read these quicker at this point. We think that the plant portion has 60% the value of corn grain or the value of grass or grass forage, because that corn cob, according to the pioneer people, is more digestible when it's harvested as snaplage than if you will let it go to maturity at that stage of the game. You may need to add some dry corn or barley to get the desired starch levels and to change the starch dynamics here, and always be monitoring your butterfat test, your MUN test, your dry matter intakes to give you a little idea how well that ration is going to work out there. So, Steve, we've covered a lot of stuff in our webinar here today. Hopefully, some of our listeners are going to look at drought-stressed corn silage and be buying that. Take-home message, I'd be buying that stuff if I'm going to be short on forages with a lack of second, third, or fourth crop. Shredlage may be an alternative you want to take a look at this year in terms of getting a different physical form forage out there. The chemically treated corn stalks with calcium oxide, to me, could be a very important product to increase the value of this lower quality stocklage. Remember the 8 or 9 silage guidelines we gave you. I think these are take-home messages here. And snaplage may be a feed that may work very well out there in your feeding program. With that, Steve, we'll turn the program back to you and to bring us up to speed for next week.
Well, Mike, thanks so much. While you're catching your breath here, I want to say you did a great job. You covered a lot of ground and some very timely topics for our participants today. Just looking ahead at our next webinar will be August 13th, featuring Paul Fricke from the University of Wisconsin, brought to us by Merck, and 5 keys for reproductive success, always a timely topic. And actually looking ahead to September 10th, Gordy Jones, Dr. Gordy Jones from Central Sands Dairy in Wisconsin, will be talking about bringing our management to higher levels out on the farms. Mike, I'm not seeing the questions there. There may be some out there, but I wanted to ask if you thought that the quicklime strategy, would that be a good match for the drought-stressed corn that we may end up with a whole plant, but not much corn, if any.
Steve, we broke up on one of your questions. Did you say the milk line, using the milk line for?
No, the quicklime. The quicklime,
yes.
The chemical treatment.
Yeah, I would say if I had barren stalks and would think it's going to be more like a corn stover, corn stock type feed, Steve, I'm pretty keen on it. We have no experience here in the dairy sector at all with it, but anything I can do to make that feed more digestible, heck, that's a little bit like Shredlage a little bit. I'm trying to make that fiber a little bit more digestible. I think it's kind of neat at this stage of the game. So listeners on the webinar, this is pretty cutting edge stuff, and you can wait a year to see if it's going to work. But I think we got a lot of dairymen here in the Midwest that are going to say, my goodness, we're just going to have acres and acres of this stuff from our neighbors and myself. How can I make it better? And I think the quicklime would certainly, Steve, my take on it was one I'd take a look at. And you saw those references as well, and I know some of this work has been sponsored by ADM, and I know they've also got their websites have this information on as well, Steve.
Mm-hmm. I wonder on a more normal year, or for those people who have more normal conditions, whether that might be a strategy for heifer silage in the future.
Yeah, I think, Steve, you got your spot on. I think unless there's a smoking gun here we don't see here, and I don't see it, I think we're going to be looking, this would also apply to corn cobs. There was some work done in Nebraska with corn cobs and with straw. And to be honest, the straw of the three, as I recall the data, the straw was the winner. The corn stalks came in a close second and cobs came in third. And so, again, I know one of my dairymen here over in McLean County has just bought 1,000 bales of straw because the price was right, thinking he may have to use this to feed some of his livestock on his dairy farm out here at this stage of the game.
Wow. Yeah. Very good. Do you have any questions that you want to address?
Yep, we got a few that came in at this stage, at this point. One says, do you get similar results with sorghum with Shredlage? I would think the opening up of the plant material would be a plus at that stage of the game. So again, my guess, a Hutjens guess, be careful on that. Hutjens guess would be that sorghum would also get some benefits as well. Now, do you? The other question you might have to ask the people who make the unit is, do I always have to chop 1.25 inches? Could I go to 1 inch, for example? Could I go to 3/4 of an inch? You know, you're going to change the dynamics of the length, but I think opening up the plant itself is a real plus. And of course, these rollers can really hammer the seed if there is seed there as well. So my guess is yes, it would apply to sorghum. Another quick question: in the Shredlage section, wow, too many S's.
Whoa.
In the Shredlage section, was the feed efficiency higher in the KP, and yet milk and NDF digestibilities were better in the Shredlage as far as that goes? I don't think there was any differences, as I recall, Jim, on the feed efficiency with the kernel process. They both were on 1.67, 1.68 at this stage of the game. So they had very, very, very good performance at that stage of the game. I think that you will see better feed efficiency with the Shredlage. I'll bet you a piece of pie, and because I think we have a chance of getting better digestibility of the fiber, and also hopefully continue to get the good starch. The starch one really caught my eye as far as that goes at that stage of the game. At this point, so I think I would expect to see some better feed efficiencies with the Shredlage product. Although the early work and Randy's was done for a shorter period of time. Any concerns of drought-stressed corn in distillers' products? I think they're thinking of maybe aflatoxin, and we are not looking at that yet, because the aflatoxin in corn silage comes from the corn. That's where the smoking gun on most of these toxins sit. And the sad part, Steve, here in Illinois, a number of our acres are having no corn at all. There'll be no corn. So I think that may minimize the aflatoxin concern. Yes, no question. With this kind of heat stress, and you have corn out there, this is all the ripe conditions for aflatoxin. Heat stress corn, a little bit of insect damage, a little bit of a earworm, and I know we had sweet corn the other night, and the worm was found our ear corn, I'll tell you, on the tip, and certainly could be a bit of a challenge as well. So, Steve, I think we will watch this, and certainly as our webinars, that's one of the beauties of your Hoard's webinars. If we see something happening like it did here so quickly with the drought in the the last week or two, we can always jump in and address that. Before I would get nervous about that, I would do some analysis, look at some of my chemical labs, forage testing labs, to see if they're picking up aflatoxin. Steve, you made a comment about corn, though, from there's some old corn out there. You want to repeat that, Steve?
Well, there was some concern among someone we talked to that, when the price goes up the way it is, there's some old corn on farms coming out of, here and there, and how well has it been kept, and are there some extra risks there, and unless you're dealing with a mill or an elevator that has a really good quality control program, are there some concerns about aflatoxins and other molds?
Another quick question came up here, and again, if you we're just about out of time here, but we have time for a couple more. In the Nebraska study where the stalks chopped, I believe that is correct. Here at the University of Illinois, they put them through a tub grinder, so they picked them up as bales, and then they reconstituted them with water and put them through a tub grinder. I think in one of those two studies, they took them, they were right out in the fields, and I know Kepke's, and some of you will recognize that name, they've been doing this technology for a number of years. They take their high moisture corn off today, and today right behind it is the chopper out there, and they're picking up their corn stalks and they're ensiling them, and they ensile very, very nicely as far as that goes. Remember, if you're going to put the quick lime on there, you're going to have a chemical reaction. That means you got to have water to get that job done. So at that stage of the game. Last question that came in here, and we don't see any more at this point. What about the nitrate levels in drought-stressed corn silage? I think it's a big concern. Our data says it's there. Just like a couple years ago, there was microtoxins sitting in our corn because of the late winter, the late growing season. So nitrates are going to be there. The question is, if there's an ear there that helps you, if the plant starts growing again, we get some moisture. My take-home message is that I would check nitrate levels after it's been ensiled for at least 2 or 3 weeks to allow the nitrates to dissipate through the fermentation process. If you bale that as hay, and Steve was telling us there are some people baling hay now here in the Midwest, the nitrates are going to lock in. They're not going to change much. Now, if you got baleage, especially if you put a baleage with an inoculant on, then we'd expect to see some reduction in nitrates as well. Remember that range of reduction? 21 to 60%. So, to me, I wouldn't, if I'm going to ensile the corn silage, I wouldn't waste my money now. Excuse me, you never waste. I would not invest my money now prior to the ensiling process. I would wait till it's coming out and then do some checking as well. I would stay in touch with my forage testing labs, and we have a number of excellent ones here in the Midwest. They're going to be getting samples in, and they're going to give us a little idea also in terms of what they see coming in. What's coming in now, obviously, are fresh samples. So those 70 samples I referred to earlier in the webinar were fresh samples. Sometime in September, October, we're going to start seeing fermented samples coming in, and we'll have a little better idea of where we're at. So we are at 1 o'clock. I think
Mike,
we got her done. So Steve, we'll turn it back to you.
Wrap it up here. Again, thank you, Mike, so much for a very timely and important presentation. We thank Vital for their support. We want to remind everyone listening and their colleagues that webinars are archived and available free on the Hoard Dairyman website. More than 10,000 people in the last year and a half have gone and accessed our past webinars, and we certainly appreciate that interest and invite you to do that. Tune in next month, August 13th. Paul Fricke from the University of Wisconsin will be talking about the 5 keys for reproductive success. So again, thanks to all for your participation. We hope to have you with us again in the future.